Hello, and welcome to our extended disc webinar. Today's topic is sales competence assessment. We're going to focus on sales competencies, sales mindsets, and sales excuse index. My name is Christina Bowser, and I'm a senior trainer here at Extended Disc. And joining me today, my guest, Markku Kauppanen, president of Extended Disc North America. Welcome.
Thank you, Christina. How are you?
Good. I just wanted to let you guys know that we will be recording this webinar. So if you want us to email you a copy, if you didn't get it all, or you just want to revisit some of it, just reach out to us. Also, because we have so many people online, we don't have time for live questions, but we do encourage you to put your questions in the questions section, and we will be sure to follow up with you with whatever email you input in. So Markku, let us get started. Why don't you give us an overview of what is the sales competence assessment?
Certainly, Christina. And over the last 25 years, we assess hundreds of thousands of salespeople around the world with our DISC assessments that we are really most known for around the world. But in the last 2 years ago, we started developing new assessments that go beyond the DISC model. And the first of those assessments is what we call a sales competency assessment. And what we do with the sales competency assessment is that since we have worked with so many sales organizations and their sales professionals, we wanted to have a very easy to use assessment tool that allows sales managers, sales coaches, and of course, sales professionals to really improve their sales success. So our objective with this tool is very clear: make it easy to use tool that allows salespeople to become more successful. And what we've seen in the last 6 months or so when we launched this tool is that really the tool has been embraced by two main groups. One is the sales managers, and the second are the sales professionals. And of course, sales managers really have been really interested in this tool because it allows them to have a specific information to really help their salespeople to basically create a roadmap to success, identify what are the areas that they need to develop, and more specifically provide them specific information so they know where to start and how to develop. We are Extended DISC, but this tool, again, is not based on DISC assessments. However, we wanted to really create a tool that ties to our DISC-based sales assessment tools. The way I look at this tool, the sales competence assessment, is that I think selling is a very tough mental game, essentially. It's a tough business. You get rejected. You have to make sure that you pursue sales opportunity very vigorously and assertively. But it's a tough business because it's just one of those things that the salespeople really they need to be so much on top of their game every day and day in and day out. And this tool has really helped to provide the information they can actually elevate their game. But it's not based on DISC, but it ties to our other DISC-based, theory-based tools.
And many people find that the online 10-minute assessment that is our DISC-based extended DISC assessment is very simple to use. But how does the sales competence assessment work? How does that questionnaire work?
The questionnaire is a little bit different. It's on our same platform that our DISC assessments are. So our clients who use our DISC theory-based tools, they have one place for all of this information. But the way the questionnaire works is that it has 99 questions and it takes about 25 minutes to complete. Now, this tool is really intended to measure a sales professional present level of competencies in 18 critical areas that I'll share in a moment. So since it's based on sales competencies, the tool is really designed for salespeople, because I've seen situations where sales managers have completed this questionnaire as well. And when they get the results, they might be a little surprised that, hey, my prospecting score is not as high that I anticipated it to be. And the reason is that they're probably not doing prospecting right now. So the tool is really designed for sales professionals and their managers who want to really help the sales professional to become more successful. And the way the questionnaire works is that when somebody logs in, they simply get an access code to complete the questionnaire. So what the salesperson would first see is instructions about what they're about to do. It takes about 30 minutes. They will click on I will do it now, and then they simply will type in their name, their organization, so we can identify who the results belong to. After they've done that, they will actually go in there and they will see their options for selecting the language in which to complete the questionnaire. Just like with our DISC assessments, it is very, very important that the salesperson has the ability to complete the questionnaire in their native language. That's really the only way to make sure we will get valid results. So once they select the language in which to complete the questionnaire, obviously this person chose English, and once they begin to see those questions, they will realize that each question has two options, and they simply ask to select the one that describes them better.
Marco, you had mentioned earlier about these 18 critical sales competencies. Can we introduce them to our audience today?
Certainly. So here are the 18 competencies. And one thing I want to make sure is that that everybody understands that when we design this assessment, we wanted to make it, again, very easy to use. So when we are looking at these 18 competencies like prospecting and qualifying and so on, everything is very clearly defined in the report. And for the audience members, if they want to see actually a sample of this report, we'll provide our contact information at the end. And even if they want to have somebody complete the questionnaire as a kind of a demo, we can certainly arrange that. But all of these competencies are very clearly defined in the assessment report. So you don't have to guess what the prospecting means. You don't have to refer to other materials to try to understand how to interpret the results. The focus is really how we use this information. So I'm not going to go over what the definitions are, but again, if somebody wants to get a sample report, they will clearly see what we mean by prospecting and qualifying and other 16 competencies.
I know that some people are probably wondering, how did you pick 18? How did we get 18 sales competencies? Why not 20 or 10?
Well, that's a great question, Christina, because when we started looking at this process, we work with several of our partners who use our sales assessments, and they really helped us to understand what is most important. Certainly, you could go and select more than 18 competencies, but these 18 were the ones that kept coming over and over. We wanted to make sure that we didn't measure too many things, because if you measure many things, a couple of things happen. One is the questionnaire becomes quite long, and the fatigue takes place. A person begins to, after so many questions, they don't even have the energy to really pay close attention what really describes them the best. And maybe more importantly is that when we provide too much information, people tend to get overwhelmed. And when people get overwhelmed, actually what they end up doing is not doing anything at all. So we felt very comfortable after all of our research selecting these 18 competencies. And after using this tool with our clients for, again, about 6 months, the feedback has been tremendously positive, but these are the things that we need to choose. Now, that being said, not all of these 18 competencies will be relevant to every salesperson. For example, if I look at the first one, prospecting, I would suspect that for most salespeople, prospecting was more important competency earlier in their sales role, when they had to make a lot of cold calls, they had to network, etc. But as they begin to develop their own client base, they begin to get more referrals. Maybe they have a reputation in their community, whatever that may be, when people are actually seeking them out, and prospecting may no longer be as relevant or as important. So when people get the results, they begin to identify what are the competencies I need to develop now that will really provide me the greatest return on my investment and effort and developing these competencies. So again, although there's 18, I would say most people have to select which are the ones I want to focus on now.
Yeah, and what Marco initially referred to is from the development standpoint, where we got to these the sales competence assessment is we had also some other sales DISC-based assessments that we had before, sales professional, which is a DISC-based assessment, but we've also developed additional DISC-based assessments, and we'll talk about that in a sec as well. But before we go into that, Marco, can you talk about how the 18 sales competencies show up in the report?
Yeah, I'm going to highlight a couple of things on this webinar. Again, I want to remind, if you want to get a sample report, just contact us and we'll get one for you. But the first section that I want to highlight today is what we call an executive summary. That very quickly and very easily on a 0 to 100 point scales will show what is the present competency level of a sales professional. So for this person, for example, prospecting at 57%, not a tremendously great score, but nothing to really be ashamed about either. But I can really very clearly see where my greatest strengths are. And I've noticed that our clients kind of focus on different things. Like here, if I look at, I think it's the fifth one on the left column, goal orientation at 95%. I notice a lot of sales managers really look at that. I really want salespeople who have a high level of competency when it comes to goal orientation, again, as defined in the report, or something called an ambition initiative, which is the third one on the right column. So here we can begin to very clearly see what the strengths are, but also what the development areas are. When we designed this report, we wanted to make sure, again, that the focus is not on how to interpret the information, but make it easy to interpret so you can actually take the information and begin to develop someone's sales success.
Yeah, and I think for those of us who are even seeing this for the first time, this overview in the report doesn't even require instructions. It's very intuitive in terms of how to interpret it. So it's very easy to move on. So Markku, can you talk about, let's talk about each one of these, or at least give an example of, once we see the overview, what do we do next?
Well, when we look at these competencies, again, they are very clearly defined in the report, not on this particular screen, but they're clearly defined in the report. But we also want to provide better understanding for a salesperson and their manager or their sales coach what these scores actually mean in practice. So if we go to the next section that we call individual scores, we very clearly define what a high score and a low score means in terms of these competencies. So for example, if I look at this person at the prospecting score of 38%, if I look at the definition on the left side, it really tells me that this person is more of what we call a farmer, somebody who's really looking at the existing client base and hoping to find new sales opportunities there. And somebody who would be getting a higher score here would be more what we call a hunter, somebody who's really taking responsibility for finding those new sales opportunities. They believe that in order for me to be successful, I need to go and look for new opportunities all the time. The reason we have this section is that we want to make sure there's no confusion about what the score means. When they clearly define both the high score and low score, what we have found is that salesperson, their manager, or their sales coach really understand what it more clearly means in practice.
Okay. So I know that with the sales competence, we have these 18 competencies, but we actually break them down further into what we call mindsets.
That's right. We call them sales mindsets. And the reason we do that is that if I know that my score for prospecting is like, in the example with the soy, it's 38%, well, I have a better idea what that really means, but I really must have a better understanding how I develop that competency. So like you said, we break these competencies down into these what we call sales mindsets that ultimately really help us really understand what the kind of a belief system a salesperson has. And really that we want to focus on if they have any self-defeating beliefs. I mentioned earlier in this webinar that I believe that sales is a tough mental game. And if you don't have the strong sales mindsets, you're going to get beat up a little bit too often. And we can develop these sales mindsets while it takes work, but we can develop them and we can begin to have a clear understanding and most importantly, awareness of where our strengths and weaknesses are when it comes to these mindsets. And the way we showed in the report is that we have this what we call a mindset summary table. I know there's a lot of information on the screen. Don't worry, I'll kind of zoom in a moment. But essentially what we do is we list the 18 competencies and then the underlying sales mindsets that make up that competency score. So if we zoom in here for a moment, and I'm going to look at the first two, one for prospecting and one for qualifying, we can look at the underlying mindsets that make up those scores. Now, again, just like with the sales competencies, we clearly define what these sales mindsets are. So when you see mindset like next step or influencing or hunger, you don't have to guess what they mean. They clearly define in the report. So if I look at the qualifying score of 67%, which by the way is not a terrible score, but it's probably something that I may want to develop. What I really want to understand is where I want to start developing this mindset. And if I look at the underlying three sales mindsets of finding the truth, reading the situation, and the hunter mindset, I can really see what the underlying scores are. And if I look at those first two at 92%, I know whether I'm a salesperson or I'm the salesperson manager, I know that this person has strong sales mindset on those two areas. That's great news. However, when I look at the hunter mindset at only 18%, now I realize that I have a little bit of an issue here. This is an area I need to develop. And the way the hunter mindset is defined in the report is that it's the reaching full potential by wanting to have everything right now. For some reason, this person believes, and this is going to be a self-defeating belief in sales success, is that I can take my time. Maybe I want to be a little bit more cautious in how I move the sales prospect forward in the sales process. They're more likely to say, hey, it's not right to have this sense of urgency. So if I were to want to develop qualifying competency, I really need to explore why I have a belief system like that. Why do I think, or why does my salesperson think that I need to take my time? And in fact, it's better to take my time than trying to assertively move the sales prospect forward in the sales process. Likewise, if I look at the prospecting score at 10%, first of all, I know I got a lot of work to do, but second is I want to take a little bit more specific focus on where do I want to start. I would want to focus here on the next step and influencing, because those scores are lower. The person has the hunger. They simply are not possessing a strong mindset in what we call the next step and influencing sales mindsets.
So again, you can see how quickly and intuitively it is to use this part of the report. So now that we have that kind of understanding of what may be getting in our way or the areas that we need to develop, where do we go from here?
And I'll show you in a second. I was going to add one thing about this because before I forget, is that when you see a sample report for the first time, people say, okay, well, I'm not quite sure what the hunter mindset, how do I develop it? We have all of that information readily available in the report. What we don't want to do is to take valuable time of the sales manager or the sales professional trying to figure out where to start. We want to provide them very specific information in the report. And what I've seen in practice is that when a sales manager looks at just a couple of reports, and they know their salespeople very well typically, they know exactly what that means in practice. What does it mean that somebody has a, let's say, a low mindset as a hunter sales mindset? They know that, hey, that's true. I've seen it in before. Now I know that I actually need to develop that, and here is how I develop it. But going back to your question, if I look at these scores, we want to know what to do with the scores. So we have developed a system of creating a development plan, and there's only 6 different scenarios based on the sales professionals' competency scores and their mindset scores. And we've provided very clear and easy to use. It's only 1 page of information. What do we need to do now? So we have those 6 scenarios. Some of them would be that, hey, this is a competency I really want to use now because I have strong competency score. I have a strong sales mindset score that go under there. But some other areas might be, hey, this is something that have a lot of potential. I want to develop this because I want to become more successful. Of course, we also may have a situation where we have limited potential right now, and we may want to think, is this something we should spend our valuable time and resource to develop now? Should we just kind of let it be for now and develop the areas that will provide me with the greatest return and quickest return on my efforts to become more successful?
Yeah, and again, this handout is a great guide in terms of where do you put your energies and which direction should you go. Let's talk about the sales excuse index. That's fascinating to me. Let's explain to our audience what that's about.
As I mentioned, that the selling is, again, one more I'm going to say, I believe is a very tough profession. And as a sales professional, we make excuses about everything, not going to the gym, not eating the way we should be eating, and those kind of things. We make excuses about work as well. And when it comes to selling, it's very easy to make excuses. We want to procrastinate making those cold calls. We may want to think we are actually spending our time very effectively by doing a lot of research about certain prospect company, for example. And sometimes that kind of activity is actually not producing sales results. So what the excuse index measures is how effectively and how much of a sales time a person spends on activities that are going to produce sales results. Since it's an excuse index, you don't want to have somebody make a lot of excuses. So you want this excuse index to be low. Henry Hunter here at 11%, that's a great score, because a low score, it tells me that in practice, this person is going to spend almost 90% of their time and their focus on activities that are directly related to sales activities. They're not going to spend a lot of time organizing their files or spending time on social media, looking at their Facebook account. They're very driven and very focused on getting sales results. By the way, in the US, the average score for salespeople is 35%, which tells me that they spend about 2/3 of their time in sales activities. I've seen the scores as high as over 80%. So if you think about this, that kind of score, that means that that person is spending less than 20% of their time on sales activities. What our sales managers who are using this tool are using, a lot of them go to this number first. They want to see, is this person going to be selling or they're going to be doing something else?
Yeah. So now that, let's say we've gone through this part of the report, we've identified the competencies that we want to focus on. What do we do next?
Well, the next step is we want to improve. Mm-hmm. So we have a section in the report, and even if I get a low excuse index, I probably want to become more successful. So next section of the report is what we call a development plan. And this section has 18 pages, 1 page for each of the 18 sales competencies. And here on the screen, I'm going to share an example for prospecting. So first, on the top half of or really the top third of the page, I should say, we identify what the prospecting is. How do we actually define prospecting in this assessment tool? Then we remind them of what kind of a score they receive for prospecting. This person got 38%. And we remind them one more time is what is a high score and what a low score actually mean. So now they have that knowledge, then we can show them what the current sales competency actually looks like in practice. This text is written for the sales professional, but also for their sales manager or their sales coach. So they can very clearly understand, based on that prospecting score of 38%, what that actually means in practice. So we have a starting point for development. We'll identify what are the strengths, what are some of the development areas. And then at the last section of this page, we provide them very clear and very specific and actionable items for development. If you want to improve, in this case, the prospecting score, here are 6 things you can do that will make you more effective with prospecting, make you more successful with prospecting. We're not going to say it's going to be easy, but we will provide them very specific information where to start and how to improve.
Yeah, and also, Markku, can you talk about the questions in the report? I understand that they're designed for the individual or even the sales coach to help them create that roadmap to success.
Yeah, the last section of the report are questions, and obviously we create questions for the 18 competencies. One thing I want to make very clear is that these questions are not the same for every salesperson. These questions are based on individual scores. So if I look at the prospecting and qualifying and building rapport here on this particular example, the first 3 competencies, those 3 questions are based on the salesperson's unique competency scores. And the way in practice I see people use this information. One is, I would say, motivated sales professionals. They actually reflect on these questions on their own. They look at these questions and they really think about them, say, what can I do differently tomorrow in order for me to become more successful in these 18 areas? I also see a lot of sales managers use these questions if they are able to spend time coaching their salespeople. They're having those development discussions with their salespeople. These questions will be very specific to the salesperson. They are not going to be boilerplate questions that you ask every salesperson. They're actually looking at where the sales professional is right now and really having questions that will have most impact. And sales coaches, I think, use it often very similarly like the sales managers do. Some sales coaches share these questions very openly. Others kind of use them as their own notes, essentially, to prepare for those coaching sessions. They keep these questions themselves. Will save them a lot of time to ask very specific and very insightful questions that the salesperson will actually think, how did he or how did she know to ask that question?
All right. Well, that is just kind of a very brief overview of the sales competence assessment. And like Markku said, it gives you a picture of your current competence levels in these 18 sales areas. So down the line, if you were to retake it, what could happen?
What will happen is that, let's say 6 months down the road, a person takes the same questionnaire again. We expect the scores to change. If they work very diligently, let's say with prospecting, when they retake it, I would expect those scores to go higher. However, I would also expect that some other scores might actually go lower, and the reason is very simple. If we pay a lot of attention and let us spend a lot of time on certain areas, we are likely to not be able to develop other areas. We simply don't have the time and energy to develop those other areas. So this tool will always identify areas that we'll need to continue to develop. I don't know if it's good news or bad news, but it's a never-ending journey. If you want to be more successful salesperson, you always have work to do. Of course, the same principle applies to any profession, but here we are focusing on salespeople, and the tool will identify a couple of things. One is what kind of progress they are making in the areas that they're working on, and what are the next areas that they really need to develop. So it provides them continuous feedback, both positive and also feedback about what are some other areas I need to develop if I want to continue to be more and more successful in sales.
Yeah, it makes me think of like my golf game. Like the more I work on my putting, maybe sometimes the worse my long range shots get. So it's a continual improvement.
Great analogy. You spend your focus on developing one part of your golf game, good chance other parts of your golf game will suffer somewhat.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. As Markku mentioned, if you're interested in a demo or you would like to find out more about the sales competence assessment or any of our other assessments that we have available, I just want to briefly mention there is a Sales 18 DISC-based assessment, which is not required to be used in conjunction with it, but it does complement it.
Yeah, that's a tool is that if you look at the sales competency this way, sales competence assessment really measures what's happening between the ears of a sales professional. Our Sales 18 assessment that is based on DISC really identifies very clearly how the salesperson is hardwired for sales. And when you use the information together, you can be very laser focused in your development efforts. You know exactly where to start, so you are getting the greatest return on your efforts to improve.
All right. Well, thank you, Markku. Thank you all for joining us. And again, feel free to reach out to us for more information.